Welcome back to a new episode of Sustainably Interested, where we explore the possibilities of turning hobbies and interests into more sustainable forms. I'm Anna, the creator of SUSTA-IN, and today we will be exploring an old interest of mine, bookbinding. I got into bookbinding when I was younger, just to reuse the leftover pages from my school notebooks. But eventually I didn't use them anyway, because I ended up with vertical lines instead of horizontal lines. Yep, young and dumb. Now that I'm older and wiser, I think I'm pretty excited to try this out again. First things first, it's time to figure out our goals for this project. So the project plan is to substitute paper with handmade recycled paper. Second, use raffia string instead of thread. And third, use the step-bound bookbinding method. First, let's get to making some paper. I went with this idea because I actually still have a lot of paper left over from my school notebooks. But I don't use them because I don't write a lot anymore. And I really just want to make use of them instead of keeping them in a box. But my plans got changed and I ended up using the already shredded paper in the shredder machine, plus a few pieces of paper I was gonna recycle ripped up. And then fill the bucket up with water so that it covers all the pieces of paper and leave overnight to soak. The next day, we take the soaked paper and mash it up into pulp. I learned this whole paper making process through this video by Nevermind Lisa, and she suggests a lot of alternative equipment to use, which makes the whole process more accessible. I picked up this tip from a comment under the video to use a hand mixer if you don't have a blender, so that's what I'm doing here. Now, you might see me picking out pieces here. Well, that's because the pile of shredded paper in the machine actually had a bank book, and that paper is not breaking down at all. So I'm trying to pick out as many pieces as humanly possible so that I can get smoother pulp. And yes, I do realize that this video is turning into a paper making video instead. But please bear with me. Finally, after some back-breaking hours, I finished the entire bucket. The end result isn't as smooth as blended, but using a machine definitely helps. You can see I eventually busted out the stand for the mixer as soon as I realized there was way too much paper to pulp. And we also have way too much pulp to just make one book. Now, on to the main event. You might be wondering why the water is this color. Well, that's cause I made this mold and decal myself using some leftover wood trim and plastic mosquito netting I found among this mess outside my house. So yeah, I have no idea why is it bleeding, but it's not staining the pulp, so I just went along with it. It took me a few tries to get the hang of it, but what was a supposedly enjoyable activity has now turned into a burden because I have so much pulp to go through. Am I regretting this? Yes. Was this part of the plan? No. But do we have to continue? Yes. To add a bit of color to this entire process, I cut up a few pieces of leftover color paper and sprinkled it into the water to make some special paper for the book covers. I then hung them up to dry until semi-wet, then ironed them to speed up the drying process. I had to do 2 rounds to finish up 1 pail of pulp and had my living room and bedroom just spread out with drying paper. Then it's time for the satisfying part of this process, removing the paper from the cloth and then press it flat with my trusty stack of books overnight. voila! We're finally at the bookbinding part. All the hard work into making the paper should pay off. So we'll be making a 220-page A5 notebooks using the step-bound bookbinding method. I made the paper to be around A4 size, so we just need to cut them in half. Next, I'll make a template with this extra piece of paper and punch holes through the paper using an awl. You can replace the awl with any other sharp stick-like objects as long as it can punch a hole big enough for your thread to go through. We've finally made it to the last leg of the project. I grabbed a few raffia strings and tore them down the center to make them thinner and tied to colors alternately together. I had to use a huge needle because the knots wouldn't pass through the smaller ones. Then it's pretty straightforward from here. I chose a sparkly gold thread for my other notebook just to jazz it up. And now we have two handmade paper notebooks. And like every other notebook, it should be put to the pen test. I've got a variety of pens here, from the basic pencils, rollerballs, gels, fine liners, brush pens, and a variety of markers plus highlighters. The criteria are simple. 1. Doesn't tear the paper, and 2. The ink doesn't feather, with minimal bleed through. It seems like rollerballs or ballpoint pens work best on the paper. For gel pens, it has to have a thicker tip in order to not risk tearing the paper, and a random collection of markers. And that's the end. We managed to achieve the goals we had for today's project, but I have to admit that this became a paper making video rather than a bookbinding video. And that's all thanks to my greed of trying to make everything super duper sustainable in the videos. So if you've learned anything at all, unless you're really into paper making, I would advise you to search for a paper company that is dedicated to sustainability or opt for non-tree based papers, because I don't think it's really worth all the trouble at all unless you really enjoy making paper. As for my papers, I think they turned out more suitable for crafts rather than for notebooks. So I think I'll undo the binding and put it into a ring folder so that I can use it one sheet at a time. And we can probably learn a lesson from this, which is sometimes it's not just about recycling things, but whether you can use it after processing it. We tend to forget the usability of the things that we make as we keep on making and making as people who like to make things, or we call makers. If the product doesn't get used, wouldn't that become a waste? Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think? That's all for today's video. If you would like to learn more about Sustainably Interested, head on over to the website in the description below. Okay, bye!